So here's the thing about life. Life is filled with irony. Now, I'm going to have to explain irony because people misuse this all the time. Irony is where you're expecting one thing to happen and then something directly opposite is what takes place. Okay, where you're recognizing that this is where you're going or this is your direction, and then something happens that is of the direct opposite, usually done with a humorous result, unless the irony is happening to you, in which case it's not so humorous for you until like a year later. Then you can look back and say, man, that's funny. But there are lots of ironies that do take place that we can recognize. Like this one. Okay, or perchance maybe you've seen, I tried getting a picture of my own of something like this. In Grand Rapids, we have something very, very close, but I couldn't quite get the line up right. But there's all these ironies that take place throughout life. Okay, that we just look at and we go, oh my word, that's funny. That is just completely ironic. This one's my favorite. Okay, texting while driving kills. For more driving tips, text safety too. That's just helpful. Okay, it's just irony. Now, the life of Saul is like one giant irony. Okay, the life of Saul is one giant irony. Because here's a guy that's persecuting Christians, but then ends up persecuted as a Christian. Here's a guy that's murdering the church and ends up murdered with the church. Here's a guy that says that talking about Jesus is false prophecy that ends up writing a majority of the Old Testament talking about Jesus. Okay, he's full of irony. His whole life is like one giant irony when you stop and you think about it. In fact, just some trivia for you. Ready for this? How many books are in the New Testament? Anybody know? Anybody know? Good job, Jeremy. 27. He gets a Cupid doll. Okay, so 27 books in the New Testament. 66 books of the Bible, 27 in the New Testament. Now, how many did Paul write?
I think 18.
Now, this one's controversial because technically it's 13, but it might be 14. It might be 14 depending on what you do with the book of Hebrews. Okay, so he wrote 13 of the New Testament, but I hold the position that the book of Hebrews was a sermon by Paul written down by Luke. That's how Martin Luther records it, way back in the Reformation period, that Paul was preaching. Luke was traveling with Paul, wrote it down. That's why it has some of the theology of Paul, but the Greek of Luke. And so I think that fits well. If that is true, then Paul is technically the author of 14 of the 27 books. Meanwhile, what we have is who wrote the most verses in the New Testament? Anybody know that trivia one? Who wrote the most verses of the New Testament?
Probably Luke.
Luke. Very good. Our associate pastor gets the Cupid prize. He got the New Testament wrong, but he got that one right. Okay, so Luke wrote the most because he wrote the book of Luke and the book of Acts. And if Martin Luther's right, also the book of Hebrews, okay? But even without Hebrews, the number of verses, Luke wins, because the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts are both incredibly long books. So when you look that Paul and Luke teamed up together and that Luke traveled with Paul, between those two guys, what do you get regarding the New Testament? Right? The majority of the New Testament. The majority of, not only is Paul responsible for half or possibly over half, but Luke responsible for the most number of verses that's not connected with Paul's writings, because Luke and Acts is not connected with Paul's writings. So you get 13, maybe 14 books plus the two biggest books. Okay, you get a lot with these two guys. Okay, so it's amazing that here's Saul whose mission is mayhem for the church. Here's this guy that wants to kill Christians. Here's the guy that looks, he's carrying a stick and he sees every Christian as a piñata. Okay, and he just wants to whack at them. That's his goal, is to piñata the church. That's what he wants to do. And he ends up being the person that changes the world and changes the church. Okay, so it's just very interesting to see that change. But until that change comes, we're going to have to deal with Saul, in a sense, Boba Fett of the New Testament. Okay, the Boba Fett of the Old Testament is Jezebel, in case you didn't know. It was a woman. Okay, but the Boba Fett of the New Testament, yeah, that's Saul. That's Saul. Now, he'll become a Christian, and then he'll become George Costanza. But that's a different issue for another day. But until then, he's Boba Fett. Okay, so he's a bounty hunter. If you're on his list, you're as good as being in carbonite. Okay, you're going to get caught. It's going to be a bad time for you. So Saul is just that brutal of a man. Here's what it reads in Acts chapter 9, the first half of verse 1. It says, meanwhile, Saul was still, now meanwhile, meaning that while the apostles were leaving Samaria, remember after the Ethiopian and the apostles went to Samaria and they're dealing with the Ethiopian, and he's getting baptized, and a lot of stuff is happening. Meanwhile, all this is going on, Saul is still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Okay, Saul is still breathing threats of murder. So while the church is growing and thriving in one area, death and destruction is about to happen in another area. And we have to be mindful that that's the way it is even still today. Still that way today. It's really easy to look around the Christian culture of America and say, wow, look at how this right's being removed and this problem's happening and this problem's happening. The future of the church looks dark and bleak and we're all getting concerned and scared. Meanwhile, what's happening in other countries? Okay? What's happening in other countries? People are getting killed for the faith, and there's also a massive revival. We're seeing ISIS killing Christians left and right, and that's because there's so many of them to find. Okay, because there's a massive revival happening overseas. So we have to kind of look that whenever one gets dark, it doesn't mean that that's how it is worldwide. There's always a give and take. A lot of stuff is going on. We need to have a global perspective. When we're seeing everything going great for us, let's say just perhaps it happens that a strong evangelical Christian becomes president and a big revival happens in our country. Doesn't mean that suddenly everything's great worldwide. Bad things could be happening in other countries. I'm not saying look around and look for all the bad things are. I'm just saying we need to have a balanced approach and recognize that where there's success, there's struggle, and where there's struggle, there's success. And we have to have a healthy approach to it. And we have to keep the whole church in mindful prayer about that because it is a constant ebb and flow, right? There's constant give and take on that. And so Saul has his mission of mayhem, but it's interesting that his mission has a lot of misdirection about it. His mission has a lot of misdirection about it. Here's how it continues in chapter 9. So Saul went to the high priest. That's interesting, by the way. Underline that. The high priest is of what religious thought? High priest is Sadducee. Saul is of what religious political thought? Pharisee. Oh, that's like a Republican going to a Democrat saying, I have a question. I have a plan. Want to help? Okay, you're just going to expect there to be fireworks. So this is interesting. So it's like a big bipartisan agreement is about to happen here. So Saul, the Pharisee, went to the high priest, who's a Sadducee, and requested letters from him to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any men or women who belonged to the way, he might bring them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Okay, so this is Saul's plan. I want to go and gather up Christians, and I want to arrest them so that they can be tried and likely executed. That's what I want to do. Can I have letters of permission to do this? And the high priest grants it, by the way. The high priest says, yeah, absolutely. Here you go. Have fun. It's like Darth Vader talking to Boba Fett saying, yeah, go ahead. Just no disintegrations at this point. Okay, Empire Strikes Back reference. No one? Okay, maybe. A couple of geeks out there. Come on, I'm looking forward to December. Okay, so I'm just getting geeked up now. That's all there is to it. So Paul has this mission of mayhem, but it's also a mission of misdirection. And so he goes to get permission first, and he goes to the Sadducees, gets this bipartisan agreement that takes place. But here's what's interesting. He strays from his teacher. By going to the high priest, getting this request from the high priest, he is directly violating his teacher. Now, here's some other trivia for you. You guys can be set for Trivia Pursuit. Saul's, if I say Paul, you know I mean Saul at this point, right? You just forgive me on that, okay? Because Paul's same person, okay? Now, Saul's teacher's name is Gamaliel, okay, or Gamaliel, depending on how you want to do your potato. Okay, so Gamaliel is Saul's teacher. In fact, we find this in Acts chapter 22, verse 3, where Saul, now Paul, says, and he's continuing in his speech, I am a Jewish man born of Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of, okay, you see that? At the feet of. That means he is not just a student who took a class. That means that he is willing to actually, in a sense, lay in the dirt to sit and hang off every word his teacher says. He is a disciple of Gamaliel, okay? He is a disciple of him, like how the apostles would sit at the feet of Jesus. Okay, remember when the Mary and Martha, and Jesus said, hey, one's working out there, but you chose the better to sit here at my feet. Okay, so it's that type of idea that he is a disciple of Gamaliel and educated according to the strict view of our patriarchal law. Okay, so Saul is a student, but more than just a student, he is a disciple of Gamaliel. Now, do you remember what Gamaliel said earlier to the high priest? It was in Acts chapter 5. I'm telling you, see, this is why we go verse by verse through the Bible, so we can see this big picture. It's real easy to miss this. Real easy to miss this. Okay, in Acts chapter 5, the apostles were arrested because they were doing things in the temple. They were put into prison. The high priest and the Sadducees were getting ready to kill them until a man, a Pharisee, stood up from the background and said, excuse me. He was highly respected. His name was Gamaliel. Yes, okay. He stands up. He's this Pharisee, and he says, do not hurt or kill or do anything to these apostles. We have seen factions come and go. We've seen cults come and go. If this is not of God, it will disappear and go away. We have this example, this example, this example. He just labels stuff off the top of his head. He's a smart guy. Okay, so he said, we got all these. If, however, it does not go away, then that means it is of God, and you don't want to be fighting against God. So the high priest and the Sadducees said, okay, we agree with you on that. We'll just beat them a little bit to get our frustration out. We'll flog them a little bit, and then we'll set them loose. Because Gamaliel was pro-tolerance concerning the Jesus movement, which makes sense. He's also a liberal. He was. This is frustrating everybody now. Gamaliel was also a liberal. He was from the Hillel school of thought. The Hillel school of thought said that you can divorce a woman for any reason, even if she's a bad cook. So if she burns your toast, go ahead, divorce her. That's any reason. Then there was another school of thought that was more strict, more conservative. It was the Shammai school of thought. That's where Jesus kind of solidified himself with a little bit when he says, no, divorce only for the case of adultery. That was the Shammai school of thought. But the Hillel school of thought said any reason whatsoever. And Gamaliel was from the Hillel school of thought. So he was kind of more liberal, not more conservative. And therefore, he was more open-minded and tolerant about the possibility of a Jesus movement. Saul, would you classify Saul as a liberal? No. Would you classify Saul as being pro-tolerant of the Jesus movement? No. In fact, we see the direct opposite. The direct opposite. We see Gamaliel saying, hey, let's just let them be and see what happens. And we have Saul going, no, let's whack them with a stick and kill them. Let's put them in prison and lock them in chains and close the door and throw away the key. Let's nuke them, napalm them, put them in a microwave. Let's just get rid of them. Okay, Saul wanted to destroy the church. Gamaliel wanted to let the church be. So why did this happen? Why is it that a student of a teacher, a highly respected teacher, so respected that Saul, as Paul, name dropped? You know you got to be somebody if Paul name drops you. Okay, because how popular is Paul? Right? He's just really popular. He was one of the leaders in the Pharisee movement. He was the one that could approve or disapprove of the stoning of Stephen. He was the one that the religious leaders threw the coats at his feet. So he's a leader. He's Boba Fett. How respected is Boba Fett? Okay? He's a popular guy, and he name drops. Then if he is so impressed with Gamaliel, why go against him so strongly? Because Gamaliel is of what political thought? Remember? Pharisee. What did Jesus say about Pharisees? Thinking back to Matthew chapter 23, verse 15, where he said, "Woe to you, Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel to the ends of the earth, and you just to win a convert, and when you do, he becomes twice as much a son of hell as you are." In other words, you make them even more of a Pharisee than you could ever be, more against that direction than you could ever be. But Saul's not acting like a Pharisee. Saul is acting like a Sadducee. That's why the high priest grants him the order to hunt down the Christians, because that's what the Sadducees want. They're the ones that are saying, kill him, kill him, kill him. And it was some stupid little old Pharisee with a cane that says, don't do that. And they go, okay, old wise man, we won't do that. And then Saul shows up and says, let's kill him. And they're like, here's your order, go for it, have at it. Okay, so why is Saul acting like a Sadducee? Because Saul believes in the resurrection. He believes in that type of stuff regarding the law, and he is a Pharisee, but he's acting like a Sadducee. That seems weird. Does that mean that Jesus was wrong about Pharisees making disciples twice as much a son of hell as they are? Does that mean Jesus is wrong about that? No, Jesus isn't wrong. So what's happening? So let me just digress here for a moment and share with you some possibilities as to why a student would stray from their teacher. And you're going to find that some of these are going to be very insightful as far as being applicable to other areas of life. For example, we're going to find why it is some people can stray from the church after being under some good leadership, or why kids can stray from their parents despite being under godly parenting, why it is that can take place. I'm sure that might just cause you to scratch your head a little bit. Why parents can have more than one child, and one child goes and becomes a missionary, and the other one becomes just a complete goofball off into the world of Satan and wants nothing to do with God. And so how could it be that a parent can raise multiple kids the same generic way? Yes, parenting changes a little bit with each child, but the overall attitude of the home is the same. Why it is one child can become a great, powerful Christian, another one can become just lost and completely just rejecting Christ. Or why it is that they can have 5 kids, 4 of them go off into Crazyville, and one of them just somehow became a Bible believer, and what did we do right with that one? Okay, and so it can be confusing. Just like it could be confusing for Gamaliel to say, what happened with Saul? He was my prized pupil. He was the one that raised up but faster than anyone else. He got the most A's, the highest GPA. He had the most potential, and now he's going off on some strict Crazyville of radicalism. Okay, so what is going on here? I'm sure he scratched his head a little bit. So let me just give a couple of thoughts. First of all, number one, this is a digression here just a little bit, so I'm not going to have a whole bunch of things for this. So you just back of your paper notes, write down as fast as you can. Number one, let me just share that just because somebody is liberal in one area does not mean they are liberal in all areas of life. So just because Gamaliel was liberal regarding the issue of divorce does not mean he was liberal regarding the issue of false prophets. Does not mean he was liberal regarding other areas of the law. Okay, and when Saul looks at the church, particularly at Stephen, and what the church is doing, they're saying they're on behalf of God, doing God's work, that Jesus is God, and that we are seeing God. We saw him raised from the dead, and we're following God. And if they believe that to be false, if they believe that to be wrong, they are then false prophets. And if they are under the old covenant, not the new covenant that Jesus initiated, the old covenant in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 20, what are you supposed to do to false prophets? Kill them. Stone them. Okay, so here's Stephen, and Stephen's saying, I see God. Jesus is God. Oh, look, up there in the heaven, I see God right now as we speak. And Jesus is standing at the seat of at his right hand. You guys are under judgment of Jesus. And they hear that, and they're hearing what they think is false prophecy. That's the attitude Saul's coming from. And he even, Paul even said in Acts 22 that I was raised under and sat at the feet of Gamaliel under the strict understanding of the law. And so he is doing what he believes is appropriate to the law under the old covenant. Here's a false prophet, let's kill them. Let's search down the church and let's kill them. And so he is doing twice as strict of the law interpretation as Gamaliel even held. What was it Jesus said happened to Pharisees' converts? They become twice as much. So Jesus is dead on right accurate. Completely dead on right accurate. So therefore, in a way, Saul is not going against his teacher completely. He is just recognizing his teacher as being weak and doing what his teacher couldn't. That's how Saul is kind of looking at it just a little bit. Also, what's going on is that in all truthfulness, there is a desire in every student, and there's a desire in every child to surpass their teacher or parent. Right? There is that desire. My daughter has the desire to be stronger than me, to not need me, to be able to surpass me. She has that. She's only 4. She has that desire even still. She wanted to climb into the cupboard to get cereal. I said, "Z, want me to pick you up?" But she goes, "No, Daddy, I don't need you anymore. I have a way of getting in there." She went and she got some stuff, set it down, and she worked on climbing and got other stuff, and she climbed up into the cupboard all on her own. She goes, "See, Daddy told you I didn't need you anymore." And that was just this morning. By the way, that was just this morning. Children have that desire. There's that desire to be able to say, "Dad, I can beat you in arm wrestling." There's that desire to say that I've surpassed you in education, surpassed you in success, surpassed you in. We have that desire all over our culture even. Where Darth Vader, looking at Obi-Wan Kenobi, says, "Once I was the learner, but now I am the master." Okay, it's that desire. It's there. Okay, it's even in our mythology of our culture. I mean, it's what is happening. And every student wants the approval and then to succeed their teacher. And I believe that's also what's motivating Saul to move at such vehement pace, to move with such zeal, to move with such passion, is because he is already the best of his class. But now he has to outshine his mentor, his professor, if you will. And this happens all the time. Although sometimes we also see other things take place. Like when somebody rises up too fast like that, they become arrogant. When somebody at a young age gets put into a position of authority too quick, too high, beyond what their britches can handle, they end up coming up with a lot of pride, a lot of arrogance, to where we end up seeing a shift within culture that can take place of arrogance rather than humility, and where the blame lies, to where you want to take down the teacher rather than change yourself. And by the way, this is entirely true. I got warned about this attitude that had taken place by one of my mentors. He was a professor, and I was getting ready to start teaching in a school at some of the colleges, and I had asked him, when you're teaching in a college classroom, what advice would you like to grant me so that I can be prepared? What would you like to share with me? And he said, "Be prepared for the class to not respect you and think they're the expert beyond you." And I'm like, seriously? Seriously? He's like, "Yeah." Where he will be teaching from a textbook, and it's a textbook he wrote, and the students will sit there in their class, it's their first semester of seminary, and they'll say, "Professor, you're wrong. I don't care what your research says. I don't care what your understanding of the Bible is. I just believe you're wrong." And he's like, "Well, where am I wrong? How is it wrong? Show me where it's wrong." They say, "I don't know. I don't know the Bible as well as you do. I just know you're wrong." And he said, "That's what you're going to have to prepare for." And I thought, wow, that's insane. But these are people in master's degrees he's talking about. Surely I'm not going to run across that with people getting an associate's or bachelor's degree. And I've run across that a lot. And almost always when I run across people saying, when I correct their paper saying, "Yeah, you poor use of grammar here," they'll say, "Well, that's you're using quotes wrong here." They'll say, "Well, that's your opinion." No, this is grammar. It's not opinion, it's grammar. This is how this works. Well, that's just, you're just being technical. It's writing. Someone handed me a paper with absolutely no punctuation at all. No periods, no commas. Just a block of words, no paragraph indents. Just and I'm like, "Dude, man, you need to develop something called a period." He goes, "You don't need periods. You can read it." What? And so I'm grading wrong, and then they're all mad at me. "Well, why? You can't grade me wrong. You can't give me a bad grade on this. I'm not a doctoral student." No, you're not. You're not going to be a college student if you keep writing like this. And it's just the arrogant. And almost always they're in positions of authority. Almost always they're in positions of authority. And so one of those things that ends up taking place is that when people rise up too quick, they begin to reject authority. When they rise up too quick into authority, they reject authority. They're unwilling to have that teachable spirit. They're unwilling to really learn, to really listen, to really pay attention. And it could be that Saul is getting a big head to the point that it's going to take a miraculous intervention to get his attention. It could be that Saul could be so haughty and so full of himself that it's going to take, I don't know, blindness to get him to see right. Wouldn't that be ironic? That it would take blindness? It's not that Saul's life is already full of irony, but wouldn't it be ironic to get him to see better, to make him blind? Oh, wait. That's exactly what happens. Where Saul meets Jesus, starting at verse 3. And it says this: as Saul traveled and was nearing Damascus, because he got his letter, he got the permission, okay, it's assumed, a light from heaven suddenly flashed around him. Falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you, Lord? He said. I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting, he replied. But get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men who were traveling with him, Saul, stood speechless, hearing the sound but seeing no one. Underline that. We're going to come back to that. That is very important. Hearing the sound but seeing no one. Then Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. He could see nothing. So they took him by the hand and led him into Damascus. He was unable to see for 3 days and did not eat or drink. What was it that Saul had to have done to get his attention? Divine intervention. Exactly what took place. And so now Saul is completely blind, which is neat because that means that his physical mirrors his spiritual condition. His physical condition mirrors his spiritual condition. He is blind and cannot see spiritually. So God made him blind so that later he will be able to see. And will be able to see exactly what he's been doing and what's going on. Now I want you to notice this. Saul did not hallucinate. A lot of people trying to excuse away this whole encounter with Jesus, saying that it was a hallucination. It was not a hallucination. They're saying that, well, it was a dream that he had. It was not a dream. What was the vision that he had? It was not a vision. How do we know that this was not a hallucination? How do we know it was not a dream, not a vision? It was not something that he made up out of psychological guilt, out of heat exhaustion, or out of some type of seizure. How do we know it was not any of those? Because people who were with him saw it and heard it. Oh, they heard it, but they didn't see Jesus. But they heard the sound. They heard what was going on. Whenever you have other people involved, it removes the issue of dream, because you can't see someone else's dream. That would be creepy. Okay, I've woken up in the middle of the night before and saw my wife sleeping, and I'll look at her for a second, and her eyes would be kind of doing this. I'll be like, oh, she's dreaming. I have no idea what she's dreaming about. You know, it could be efflumps and woozles as far as all I know. Okay, but I have no idea what she's dreaming about. Okay, we can't see it. We can't hear it. I can't hear her dream. That would be wild, wouldn't it? I can hear her dreaming. If somebody were to have a vision where they see something that's very internal that they're seeing kind of like a dream, you can't, other people can't hear that. If you're hallucinating something, other people can't experience that either. They can experience you hallucinating, but they cannot experience what you are hallucinating about. Okay, so we know that this is a real, actual event. And it's important to know that it's not a vision. It's important to know that it's not a dream. It's important to know that it is Jesus physically, literally appearing to Paul so that Paul can later be called an apostle. Because in order to biblically be called an apostle, you have to be able to be a disciple who has seen with your own eyes the resurrected Jesus. That's what it takes. It's one of the requirements, as well as having the gift of the Spirit in a miraculous sense, another sign of the apostle. Okay, and what does Paul eventually, he has seen, therefore, here, Jesus resurrected. He gets to be taught a little bit by Jesus too. And then later gets filled with the Holy Spirit and does the signs of the apostle, various miraculous gifts. We'll find that in our second half of Acts later on down the road, where he raises people from the dead and heals people and does amazing things. Okay, so what we see is what is happening here is that Saul is becoming an apostle. Jesus is setting it up. But isn't it interesting that Jesus chose Saul? I mean, I don't know about you, but I never once saw Luke Skywalker trying to convince Boba Fett to join the rebels. I've not seen that movie, okay? That has not happened. That would be a weird movie, but it's just weird. Who would have ever thought to go to Osama bin Laden and share Jesus with him? I noticed no missionaries tried hunting him down to do that. Think it should have happened. Same thing with Saddam Hussein. Same thing with the leaders of ISIS. Why is it that they're only hunting them down with missiles? Where are the missionaries saying, let's reach these people and lead them to Christ? But there isn't that attitude. I'm glad to know Jesus has that attitude. That he will hunt down the most vicious, most vilest of people and say, come work for my kingdom. I want your tenacity in my kingdom. I want you to be as shrewd as a serpent, but harmless as a dove. You got the shrewdness part. Now we got to work with the harmless part. It's amazing that that's what Jesus does. Okay, so what I want to do is, as we look at this calling of Saul, we'll see more of it next time. Mother's Day, as a matter of fact, if I got my weeks right. Next week should be our associate pastor again. The week after that's Mother's Day. So we'll learn about Saul's blindness during Mother's Day. Appropriate? Yes. Very appropriate for Mother's Day. You'll see. You'll see. It's going to be great. So we're going to be handling that on Mother's Day. But I want to give you a few words of encouragement regarding what it means that Jesus calls Saul. Regarding what it means Jesus calls Saul. I want to give you 4 words of encouragement. We're going to close with these 4 words. 4 words of encouragement that I think will just really be inspiring as far as what Jesus does in the lives of people and what it means. So the first word of encouragement is this. No one, when it comes to Jesus, no one is beyond hope. Yes, there are some that could commit the unforgivable sin of blaspheming of the Holy Spirit. We have no idea who those people are. We have no way of knowing who those people are. Jesus draws that line in the sand himself. We'll let him deal with that. As far as we are concerned, no one is beyond hope. No one is beyond hope when it comes to Jesus. Saul was what type of a guy? Murderer, a persecutor, very smart, very educated, hard to reason with. I think that's one of the reasons he got ticked off at Stephen, because it looked like Stephen, who was less educated, was possibly befuddling Saul with all his education. If he was likely there for that. If he was there for the stoning, he was there for the arguing, more than likely. Okay, so it possibly one of the reasons Saul got mad at Stephen. But Saul is a smart guy, very intimidating, very much a hateful person, full of anger, and yet was not beyond hope when it came to Jesus. There might be people in your life, bosses in your life, employers, siblings, other family members that you just want to say there's no hope for these people. My spouse, my grandfather, my children, my employer, my neighbors, there's just no hope. They are just so arrogant. They're just so vindictive, so mean, so lost. But they're never too lost for Jesus. He can still reach them. They're not beyond hope. If Saul can be reached, so can other people. Encouragement number 2. An attack on the church is an attack upon Jesus himself. This is a warning and an encouragement at the same time. Remember what Jesus said to Saul? Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting Christians? The church? Me. And then Saul says, who are you? And Jesus said, I am the one whom you are persecuting. I am the one whom you are persecuting. That's in verse 6, or second half of verse 5. Here's what's neat about this. We don't get this in our English translation. The original phrasing of this is ego eimi, which technically means I the I am. is the one you are persecuting. We don't get that in our English, just unfortunate. You now know. Jesus says, Ego eimi, I, the I am. What is Jesus saying to Saul? I am God, and you are persecuting me by attacking my church. You think that got Saul's attention when he heard this voice say, I am the I am? Saul's a study of what? The law. You think he knows Moses? You think he knows what it means to be called the I am? Yes. And Jesus says, I, the I am the one whom you are persecuting. I am God, you are persecuting me. This is a warning because, one, be careful whenever you want to belittle, slam, or insult another church or Christian. Be very, very careful. Just because they're of a different denomination and a different mindset with different convictions than you, be careful when you want to belittle them or insult them or shame them or reject them or, even worse, persecute them, because it's possible that despite the differences, you could still be attacking Jesus. So be very, very careful. And then second, the encouraging part is when somebody is after you, they're really after Jesus. When somebody hurts you, they shame you, they insult you because of Jesus, and they look down upon you because of Jesus. They look down upon you because of your submitting to the Bible. They try to belittle you. They try to mock you. They're mocking Jesus. And one day, Jesus is going to return and set the record straight. One day, Jesus will set the record straight. That's why there is so much hope in the second coming. That's why there's so much hope there. Because we know that we're suffering now, and one day Jesus will make it right. Because it's an attack upon him, and he's not going to take that lying down. He will avenge himself and his church. Because how much does he love his church? He loves her so much. Not only did he die for her and rise again for her, he also personally identifies with her and fights for her. It's kind of like this. If somebody were to attack my wife, they're not attacking me directly, are they? Yeah, actually, I'm going to view it that way. You attack my wife, you're coming at me. Okay, because my wife is my wife. And when someone attacks the church, they're attacking Jesus' wife. They're attacking his bride. I could talk to any guy here. If someone were to go after your wife, like even my brother-in-law, someone were to come after his wife and try to raise a hand against her, you think he's going to sit there in a chair saying, well, the sports are on. Tigers might actually get out of this losing streak. No, he's going to get up out of that chair, and we're going to see him move faster than we ever thought possible. He's not going to be doing like this. He's going to be full sprint. He's going to go at it and root. And I'm going to tell you, I fear for the guy that goes after his wife. Okay, I just do. I fear the guy that goes after his wife, which is kind of cool that he's my brother-in-law, because if somebody goes after my wife in a way that it can outdo me, I just call my brother-in-laws. We'll just team up like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, and I'll just be the Bruce Willis, and we'll just be Expendables all over the place, and we're just going to go at it, okay? Well, not Bruce Willis. He was kind of a bad guy in that movie, but you get the idea, okay? And so I'll be Jet Li. There we go. I'll be Jet Li. I'll be the little guy who's scrappy. Jesus views an attack of the church as an attack upon himself. That is, by the way, incredibly encouraging, because it gets the eyes off of ourselves and puts it on Jesus where it belongs anyway. Puts it on Jesus anyway. Word number 3 would be this: Jesus pursues us before we pursue him. Jesus pursues us before we pursue him. This is incredibly important, because those people that are in your life that you think are beyond hope, just know that before you even think about opening your mouth to try to reach that person, Jesus is already involved. He's already been working at it. The Spirit's already been sent. Okay, Jesus pursues first. In fact, Paul even later wrote in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 3, that no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit. Which means you cannot confess Jesus as saving Lord and for salvation unless you already have the Spirit first working on you. That happens first. Jesus pursues first. And it drives me nuts when Christians get this backwards. It's like a little pet peeve, but it drives me nuts. They'll say stupid stuff like, well, you know, one day I found Jesus. You found Jesus? He was hiding? He was playing hide and seek? Really? He was missing? Who's the one that's lost? We are. We're the ones that's lost, not him. God's not lost. We're the ones that's lost. He pursues us. You know, that's one of the things I love about the movie Forrest Gump. There's this moment where Forrest Gump's sitting on the shrimp boat, and Lieutenant Dan's on the boat, and Lieutenant Dan says, "Have you found Jesus?" And Forrest Gump ever so wisely says, "Didn't know I was supposed to be looking for him." Do what? Okay. Oh, it was in his room. But you get the idea there, that he's like, I didn't know I was supposed to be looking for him, you know? And it's just this neat moment there. We're not supposed to find him. He finds us. And that's good to know, because when we screw up, we get to know that he has a grip that doesn't slip. And that he will hang on to us tighter than we could ever hang on to him. And that sacrifice of Jesus on the cross will never fail and never let us go. So when he finds us, that means it's his grip that's holding on to us. Such encouragement in knowing that he pursues us. We did not pursue him. And then lastly, Jesus redeems gifts, talents, abilities, etc. Jesus redeems that. He doesn't reject it. He doesn't delete it. He redeems it. Think about Saul just for a moment and how God used Saul for his kingdom without having to, quote unquote, change Saul too much. Think about that. Saul did not change a lot. Was Saul full of zeal before Jesus? Was he full of zeal after Jesus? Was Saul very educated before Jesus? Was that education used after Jesus? Was Saul full of passion and perseverance before Jesus? Did Saul possess passion and perseverance after Jesus? You see, everything that Saul was, Saul kept. It just got redeemed. Everything Saul used to persecute the church got used to grow the church. Everything Saul used to attack the church was used to encourage the church later. This same Saul who would walk, by the way, over 150 miles to get to Damascus. Think about that. To walk 150 miles to hunt down a Christian to kill them. To drag them back to put them in jail. How much tenacity do you need to do that? How much perseverance and dedication, how much drive and zeal do you need? I have not ever walked 150 miles for one project in my life. When I think about going to the mall and I think it's 25 miles away, I go, really? Do I even feel like driving that today? It's a half hour. Maybe I'll just order on Amazon, okay? To think that he would walk 150 miles just to find a Christian to attack shows his level of crazy commitment that gets redeemed, allowing him to walk that many miles to plant a church, to encourage a church, to walk that many miles to be able to reach out to a Christian who's struggling, to walk that many, to use that same tenacity, that same commitment, that same perseverance, to be given a beating and whipped within an inch of his life, and then stand up and go, wow, I'm not dead. I think I'll preach some more. And then start preaching some more. That's what happened, by the way. At one point, they beat him and they stoned him and they thought he was dead. because he was unconscious, laying lifeless on the ground. They piled rocks on him and threw rocks upon him and kicked him and whipped him and threw more rocks on him to where he just was unconscious, believed to be dead. They pulled up his arm, dropped, nothing. He was within a breath of his life, just about dead. They begin to leave. He comes to, looks around in pain, bleeding, broken, just a mess of a man, looks around and goes, I'm still alive. Sits up and goes, let's preach some more. And he still goes back and starts talking about Jesus. This is the same Paul, the same Saul, who would travel 150 miles, that is willing to never give up for the kingdom of God. Jesus took his abilities and used it and redeemed it. What abilities do you have that Jesus needs to redeem? I want you to each examine your life just a little bit and ask yourself, what do you enjoy doing? What do you fill your spare time with? What are your passions and your drives and your desires? What are your talents? What is it you're capable of? And how could Jesus redeem that? Use it for his glory. Not that you have to change it, not that you have to delete it. How can he take it and just redeem it? And use it for his glory, for the benefit of others. Not to make yourself great, not to make you great, not to make your kingdom great, but to make his kingdom great. For the benefit of the church and the benefit of lost people and the benefit of just people in general. How could he take your drives and redeem them? And that's going to be a prayer you're going to have to offer to God directly. Is, Lord, what do I have that you can redeem to use for your kingdom and for the benefit of others? What do I have? Take it and redeem it. The problem is a lot of us are afraid. We're afraid. Afraid of what? Well, afraid of failure. Afraid of looking like an idiot. Afraid of doing the wrong thing, of avoiding his will. Afraid of misunderstanding and misdirecting. Afraid. I love how we get an insight for when Saul gets his abilities redeemed by Jesus as he becomes Paul. He later writes this in Romans chapter 1, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is God's power for salvation to everyone who believes." I am not ashamed. You know, here's what this word means, this word ashamed. Okay, this is a very amazing, absolutely amazing word. It means this: I do not feel or experience pain or intimidation or the sensing that I'm a second-class citizen because of the gospel. I do not feel pain. I don't feel a loss of status. I do not sense that I'm a second-class citizen because of the gospel. And I know this is where we struggle. This is where a lot of our fears are, because we come across people that are educated and they look upon the knowledge of the Bible as being stupid, as being unscientific, as being mythological. We see people that come across, they say, well, they have their degrees in chemistry. You have your degrees in Bible. Well, you have a useless degree because these degrees are more scientific. And we don't need to be shamed about that. We don't need to be shamed that we happen to like Christian music versus this other music because we like worshiping God. We don't have to be ashamed because of the fact that we like to pray before we eat and we believe that Jesus is involved in everyday life and can change our parenting style, can change our work ethic, can change everything about us to the core of our being. We don't have to be ashamed about that. We don't have to look around and say, no, when we don't want to speak to someone else about Jesus, it's because we're afraid that they're going to reject us. We're afraid they're going to mock us. We're afraid they're going to ask a question that we can't have an answer to. We're afraid that they're going to look upon us as a second-class, uncivilized, unscientific, ignoramus person. And that is not the case. We don't need to be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it is that gospel that leads to salvation. It's the only gospel. Paul was arresting those people who were part of the way. And they were calling themselves that because Jesus said, I and I alone am the way and the truth and the life. You're the ones that get to walk around the stores with the life ring, with all the world's boats sinking. Everybody's in the water and they're drowning. You got the life ring. And you're really going to be ashamed at saying, I have a life ring that can save your life. We need not be ashamed of that. We need not to be ashamed to tell somebody you're drowning. How dare you insult me about my swimming abilities? I can tread water for hours. Well, that's nice. Hell is forever. Can you tread water that long? I don't think so. Have a life ring. It's called Jesus. You kind of need it. Okay, we don't need to be ashamed. We don't need to be viewed as a second-class citizen. Just how people feel. Think about it. When you see somebody in line and you think, maybe I could just tell them about Jesus just a little bit. Maybe I could bring this up. Then comes those thoughts. Then comes the increased heart rate. Then comes the rise in blood pressure and maybe the tingling in the fingertips and the nervousness begins to kick in. How do I start? What do I say? What happens? What do I go with? What if they ask? What if they reject? What if they laugh? What if they mock? All of that is about shame. It's a fear of shame. And we don't need to be ashamed about the gospel. We can just step back and realize Jesus is already pursuing. No one is beyond hope. And every gift and ability and passion you have can be redeemed so that somebody can accept Christ. Everything you have. I've helped lead people to Jesus simply because of my love of movies. And weird ones at that. Okay, I've watched discipleship and people's relationships grow just by watching wrestling. I've watched a father learn more about his son from wrestling. Just like during the WrestleMania, I got to watch a dad go, wow, I had no idea my son knew all this stuff. And he was able to have a tighter knit bond because of Jesus can redeem anything. Just can't be ashamed about it. Can't be ashamed about the gospel. If you're going to say the prayer, Lord, what do I have that can be redeemed? Help me see. You're going to need, by the way, the Holy Spirit for that. You're going to need the power of the Holy Spirit to really be honest, to really recognize, to not delve into depression. I have nothing to offer. I got nothing to give. I just have no gifts. I'm just a useless, worthless, whatever. Or whether you say, I don't have time for this. You're going to need the power of the Spirit to be honest with yourself. You're going to need the power of the Spirit. Because here's the thing. God also told us this. He did not give us a spirit to cower. He gave us the Spirit to be courageous. The Holy Spirit will give you courage, not fear. We were not meant to fold up into a fetal position wondering why me. We were meant to march forward to the beat of the drum of Jesus for his kingdom as soldiers. That's what we're meant to be. We need that courage. We can't be ashamed. Let's have a word of prayer.